But I want to start out by showing this process here of you're going to need an 8 or 9 millimeter button and just sand down the flat side and get a soft snowflake. I don't know what else to call them, but you can see what it is here. And you can see that when you set it on there, where all the bits sort of come to, which is perfect, because what we're going to do is we're going to cut that part that is covered by my blade completely off on all of them, and then install this, and it will look like a drive wheel or a return wheel or whatever it is that is on the back. So I'm just going to do that, and just use your scraper blade to just nip from each direction. Don't try to take it off in one, or you'll be left with a bit of a stalk coming out between those two. You don't really want that, it looks weird. Now obviously this doesn't look exactly how the wheel looked historically, but it's pretty close and looks cool, so this is the best way I've found to do it. Or at least the best way that, yeah, it looks better than anything else I found locally. Feel free, though, if you have different snowflakes or a different idea on how to do the detailing on there, to do it your own way. This is just a suggestion. And you want to just glue this to the flat side of this button here. So you'll need to make 2 of these for each vehicle. But I'm only going to show myself making one. Got one made already over here. Okay, so now that we're there, I've already got some buttons glued down here a little bit, but I want to show that process. So if you're using rocket candies, you want to look at both sides, and generally one will be a little bit chipped or worn looking, and one will look like it's more machined. So choose the machined edge to not put glue on, which means it'll be visible. And you want to glue them down to like standard cereal box cardboard. So you're adding an extra layer of thickness to them to make them nearly as thick as when you use the 2 buttons. It's not quite the same, but it's pretty close. And you definitely can't use more than 1 rocket candy. They're far too thick for that. So you want to do that 10 times over. Just put a line of glue around the edge because they're very concave on both sides, and just glue them down. Essentially the same thing with your button. Now I've got 4 already glued down and a wheel made. I've got 5 buttons here, but you need 10 for each vehicle that are sanded on both sides. And what you want to do is you want to glue the side that's not flat down to cue card paper or index card paper, just a little bit heavier than regular gauge paper, but still fairly thin. So you're not actually trying to make space, you just want another flat surface to glue stuff to successfully. If you're trying to glue stuff to this concave surface, things end up all over the place. So we're just making it flat rather than trying to expand the size of it a little bit more. That's why the different materials for the wheels. Anyways, once you've got that done, and allow them to dry, obviously, you're going to need to let them dry quite thoroughly before you try to cut them out. But I've got some dry ones here. So with the rockets, you want to be pretty careful when you're cutting them out. Not only are you cutting through a thicker surface, but you can grind off some of this candy. I mean, it's just sugar, essentially, and flavoring or whatever. If you scrape your scissors against there, and I mean, you'd rather grind a little bit of the candy off than leave some cardboard showing at the back. But try not to do either. And just cut slowly and carefully around the edge. And you should be able to get a fairly nice round surface. And this will be at the back, so it'll be pretty much hidden anyways. But if there's like a large amount of cardboard cresting, you will probably be able to see that unless you hide it well while you're installing the wheel. So just try to get as close as you can. Same thing with the buttons, but you can be pretty aggressive on how close you cut, because obviously you're not going to trim any of the plastic off with your scissors. And like, we're done with the rockets now, but we got lots of button work to do still. So let's just continue with that. So you'll have 5 buttons that are sanded on just the flat side, but not the concave side. You also want to select through your buttons to find ones that have, while it's not necessarily that they have a deep concave, but just try to standardize it so they all look similar, because that will be showing in the end. And you want to make some hole punch discs, some 7mm hole punch discs. If you use the same material that you used for these, it's not a bad idea, but you can use thinner material for this if you want. If you remember, I covered that if you have thicker cereal boxes that aren't very good for actually folding, they do actually this job well. So you can select some of those. You only need 2 of these for each wheel you're doing, so I'm only going to show 1 wheel's making, so I may as well just use those ones. Okay, so definitely you want to sand, again, the flat side. So there's 5 more buttons here I've selected, so just, you don't have to sand them aggressively, you just want to make them have some ridges that will successfully glue to these hole punch discs, because you need a little bit of space between the 2 wheels, or else it just looks like one, and it's not what it looks like historically. And since we're going out of our way to make this look better and more like the T-34, we might as well get it right. Whoops. So try to get these on there flat and in the center. And just leave them to dry for a bit. Now you don't necessarily have to glue the glossy side down. It just, I just did. Okay. So while we're waiting for that to dry, let's cover. We're gonna insert these rear mini axles, and we want them to be really strong, because when we put the track on, we're gonna put pressure on these 2 to bring it tight. And so if this is weak, this obviously isn't weak because it's got a full length of stick through the whole body. But if these are weakly inserted, then they can pop out, and it causes you a terrible trial after everything's already completed, which is a bad time to have that. So you want to cut, well, first kind of select through your skewers, and if you have one that seems sort of soft, bendy, you could tell it's made of bamboo heartwood, which is perfect for this job because you can snip it easily. So all you have to do is roll it for a second below your scraper blade and it just pops off. If you have the thicker, stronger stuff, then this takes forever to try to do. If that's all you have, then you can kind of score it around and try to break it off with some pliers. But often, if it's not the heartwood, it will splinter because these are only 3 millimeters long. So they're quite small and they don't have a whole lot holding them together anymore. So just, you might have to make a few of them if they're exploding on you or whatever, but just continue until you've got some tiny little nubbins. And I know they're small, but we're just trying to make something that won't come apart. Oh, and before you actually do what I just did, test to make sure they're going to fit in there. Which is kind of why we selected a smaller than normal, if you can possibly find one, skewer. So if you can find a diameter skewer that's a little bit smaller as well, that's to your advantage because you want these to fit easily in that hole that you created. And sometimes that hole shrinks a little when you're like carving it flat or attaching the last piece. So you may have to take the bit and hollow that out a bit to get this in there nicely. So you want it in there all the way, or else you're not going to have the strength that is required to put the track on. And you also don't want it coming out on a weird angle. So it should be coming out fairly straight. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be fairly straight. So just test fit, make sure it's going to get in there. If it isn't, use the bit to make yourself a little bit of room. And you can press it against the side of the wall and use it like a file rather than drilling through this final 7mm hole punch disc. That's your backing. And obviously with it all hardened like this, it's not going to be easy to scrape any away, but you do need to get this set in there quite well. So take a little bit of time and do it right. It's to your advantage. Okay, so once you got that ready, set that aside again, let that dry. You want to let that dry really well before you're putting any kind of pressure on it, just so those set in there really thoroughly. So we're going to go back to this and we're going to create the wheel finally. But first, what you want to do is, if you remember when we hardened these, we were really careful to go all the way around the edge, the outside edge of these, or else they delaminate. You have to do that for these wheels too, or else they will do the same thing, and you'll be really annoyed that the wheels will just keep coming apart on you. And it's not where the 7mm hole punch discs are actually glued together, it's delamination. So we can prevent that, or at least reduce it. If you put a lot of pressure, you'll still get that effect. But you can help reduce that by making sure that you get glue all around the edge of the hole punch disc. And then when you've got that, glue them together. And you want to make sure that you're gluing them lined up nicely, because if they're offset at all, you'll see that and it looks silly. So just make sure one is directly behind the other. And also, because you're going to be having a lot more than one of each, make sure that one is got the paper backing and one is open like this. So it doesn't happen often, but you might make the mistake and glue concave on both sides, and then you got to peel them apart and glue it to the right piece. So just be careful when you're putting them together. So for each vehicle you're going to do, make either 10 of these or 10 of these, and 2 of these for each vehicle. And you'll be ready for the next step.